Welcome back to another episode of the Local Voices podcast. In this episode, I am sitting down and talking to my friends Adrienne and Christina, and we're discussing their embryo adoption journeys. This was a very educational conversation for me. I had so many questions, and I was so honored that they took the time to answer them for me, and hopefully they're answering your questions. I didn't even know until they went through this process that this was even an option to build your family. So I felt like I learned so much from this conversation. And I hope it's really helpful to you too if you're looking for information on this process. So yeah, let's just jump right in. Hi, ladies.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you both doing?
Good. Slowly recovering from the holidays.
Yeah.
Same.
Aw.
Well, I'm so thankful that you guys agreed to do this. I'm actually really excited about this episode because there's a lot that I've wanted to know on my end. So yeah, I've always wondered about your stories and how it all came to be. Because you got some beautiful kids out of this whole process. So if you guys want to quickly introduce yourself, we'll start with Christina.
Yes, I'm Christina. I am mother of 10, soon to be 11 this year. Married to my wonderful husband, Jonathan.
I did not know this.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Wow, congratulations.
Yes, in June, we'll be having a little girl.
Oh, congratulations. I'm so excited for you guys.
We are excited. I've been married to my husband for 17 years, and we've just had, I feel like, in some ways, the most wild life. We will have, this will be our 7th biological. We have 1 embryo adoption. We have 1 traditional adoption, and then we have 2 with guardianship. So that's kind of how our family is made up currently.
I'm Adrienne. I have been married to Rick almost 15 years, I think. And we have 7 kiddos, 4 biological, and then 3 embryo adoption siblings. They're all genetic siblings to each other. And
That's
just
amazing.
had my last baby, last one. We are done. Shop's closed.
Are you sure? Because Christina, I mean.
We're done many times.
Oh, well, that's amazing. Okay, so I think this started with Christina, right? Like, how did embryo adoption come on your radar for your family?
Well, we were a year in to having Gracie, and we had never heard of this before. And we were meeting with our adoption attorney and our adoption consultant, checking in with them a year after or a year into having Gracie. And they asked us, so are you going to adopt again? Are you what's your next move? And Jonathan had been talking, and he wanted to adopt. We thought we only wanted 1 more. We have 4 currently. And I wanted to carry another baby. I was I want to be pregnant again. And he was and so we weren't quite ready to make the move or anything, but we just couldn't quite decide how we were going to do that. And our adoption attorney said, well, there's a way to marry your 2 desires. And that's through embryo adoption. And we walked away from that dinner and being that is the craziest thing we've ever heard. And John's there's no way we're doing that.
It's amazing.
So, yeah. Funny enough, that was November of 2016. And after hearing about it at that dinner, the Lord brought it to our attention through different stories, through a book I was reading. It was anywhere we turned, we kept hearing about embryo adoption. So after some time and some discussions, we're let's just call, let's just see. We had some stipulations if we were going to move forward and adopt. And so someone had recommended calling a local fertility clinic, and we made the first call in the end of March, and we were transferring in July. So it was just a whirlwind.
Oh, wow. That's quick. Okay, so that was back, you said, in 2016?
November 2016 is when we first heard about it ourselves. And then 2017 is when the Lord, we joke, like 2017, and the Lord tilted the entire game of life, and we just like fell into every open door. We just like, we don't know how we ended up where we ended up. The Lord just like, we were tripping into yeses that we didn't even know what they were. And before we knew it, everything was just happening.
Wow. Okay, so then you had, remind me, you had a little girl, right?
Yeah, so we had Liam and Bo, and then we had a few miscarriages while we were trying for a third. And my OB was going to send us to a fertility clinic anyways, but we knew we both wanted to adopt at some point in time. So we started that route, and in that process ended up pregnant as well. So we have Gracie and Teddy, who are 9 months apart. And so at the end of that year, they were both one. Teddy was just turning one at the end of that year. So we were thinking what our next moves were. But yeah, so we had 4, and we thought this was our last little one that we had to our family. So I'm sure the Lord laughed greatly at our plans, as he's not even in the bottom half.
Oh, he tends to do that, I think, a lot. Laugh at our plans. So.
Yes.
Oh. Okay, so then Adrienne, you heard about this from Christina? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's how I found out about it. We were messaging on Instagram. I think you had just had Fitz, and you hadn't announced like how he came about.
Oh, yeah. We told nobody, partly because we thought it was my last, and we thought it was crazy we were doing this. And so we didn't expect anybody else to think anything different. So we just didn't tell anybody what we were doing. So when he was born, we announced to everybody how he came to be. And that was quite a process. A friend of mine was actually writing for a local magazine in Texas, and we had told her. And so she asked if we could write down kind of our story. And so we did that. And then once he was born, we shared that magazine article that had come out that same month as a way of kind of getting all the information out there and answering all the questions at once. And so that was we kind of announced we had a baby, and also it was an adopted embryo.
Wow. So your parents didn't even know either?
No, we didn't tell anyone. You know what? My parents did know. And part of it was we had talked to them about adopting again. And so they wanted to help fund an adoption, and we weren't going to like take their donation and then they're going to be like, oh, you're pregnant. So what'd you do with that money?
Right. Yeah.
It ended up being the sweetest thing for them to be a part of, because my dad ended up passing 7 months after Fitz was born. So for him to have been a part of the whole process, and Fitz, our adopted embryo, little boy, our son, carries my dad's middle name as his middle name. So it was just a really sweet season to have them a part of it all.
Wow.
So yes, okay. Then Adrienne messaged.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were actually in the process of like filling out forms for domestic adoption. And Christina had like mentioned embryo adoption. I'm like, what is that? That's amazing. Because I loved being pregnant. And so she told me about that. And so then I was like a psycho person researching everything and like emailing fertility clinics, because they had it like so easy. And at that point, when I was doing the research, was 2019, and fertility clinics at that time had like closed their doors to like people coming in from outside to use their embryos. You could only use them if you were pursuing fertility treatments with them. Which is not what we were doing. We didn't want to pursue fertility treatments and then adopt embryos. We wanted to just adopt embryos. And so that's how we found the NEDC, the National Embryo Donation Center, which they treat embryo adoption like a traditional adoption, where you have to get a home study and You can choose open or closed adoption. And so we have an open adoption with our donors. We call them the donor family. And we just email each other. We haven't ever met each other in person or anything. But Christina had told me about it and I was hooked from there.
Wow. Okay. And how old is your youngest again?
So Eloise will be 1 next Wednesday.
Okay. And she's one of the siblings, right? That you guys adopted? Okay.
Yeah. We adopted 7 embryos total and we ended up using 4 of them. So we did a transfer in 2022 and that one failed. And then we did Eloise the May of 23, transferred her May of 23. And then she was born January of 24. And the boys, of course, were born in 2020.
Oh, that's right. They're twins, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I forgot about that. Yeah. That they're twin boys. It's been so long since I've seen you guys as families or seen you guys in person. So I'm sorry if I'm forgetting the order.
It's okay.
There's a lot of them.
It's kind of hard to back up.
Yeah. But oh my gosh, how fun. Your houses have to be a mix of chaos and like laughter and joy and all the things. Like, I love that. I love that so much for you guys.
It's a circus.
Yeah, I call it organized chaos.
Mine's not organized.
I was going to say, at least you have the organized part. I don't know that I would have the organized part. I would be surviving.
As much as I try.
I'm surviving with my 3. So, that's amazing. Okay. So you said you used, Adrienne, the NEDC. Is that right?
Yes.
And you went, Christina, because you were already going through fertility treatments. Is that right? Were you?
No, at this point, I had met a girl at a adoption retreat who had mentioned embryo adoption and connected me with someone she knew that had gone before. So I had messaged this complete stranger, and she was so precious to walk me through the process because Jonathan and I did, on the opposite side, Jonathan and I did no research. We were like, we'll just call. And they're like, we have an opening next week for you to come meet the doctor. And we're like, oh, wow. Okay. And Jonathan was like, well, we really don't want to do that unless we know, because our adopted daughter, Gracie, she is biracial. So she has gorgeous curls. And as my little kids back then said, she's real tan. So we were like, in our minds, this was our last child we would be adding. And the rest of the kids are all blonde haired, blue eyed, pretty fair. And so if we were going to adopt, we wanted the opportunity to give her more of a mirror sibling. So she wasn't such an island in our home. And so one of the stipulations that we had is if we were going to go this route, that we would have to find a biracial embryo. And so they're actually not they're much more rare in the embryo world. So we didn't know how easy it would be to find. And we called RBA. That was the first phone call we had. And we were like, we'd love to meet with the doctor, but it's really not worth it if, this is our goal. And so they connected us with the embryologists, the ones who are, take care of the bank of embryos. And I said, we have a batch of biracial embryos that we can go ahead and match you with before you start the process, which is, as I learned post embryo adoption, that's not usually how things work. And I think we just somehow fell between the cracks, and just the Lord, like I said, tilted the game of life. And so by the time we had seen the doctor the next week, we were already matched with an embryo. And we still had to do an in-depth ultrasound to make sure that, we joke that was our home study for Fitz was there to make sure that I was, capable of carrying him. But I mean, he was like, oh, well, I guess you've already done step 2 and 3, even though we were just doing step 1. So we just kind of, again, I don't even know how. It was just all the Lord.
Wow.
Yeah, that was kind of part of my research too, was like we wanted Filipino embryos. And so before we even settled on the NEDC, there were several places that I like called or like emailed, and then they were hard to find. Like full Filipino embryos were very difficult to find. And when I stumbled upon the NEDC, I was emailing them and they were like, well, we don't really let people know the embryos we have in the database. And I'm like, well, it won't really be worth my time if I, do the application process and spend the money and then get to that point and you don't have any Filipino embryos. Like that is kind of what we're looking for. And so she was kind of like, did it not by the book and let us know what they had available for us to even be able to look at. And there were not very many.
And you were looking for that because your husband is Filipino, for those listening, right?
Yes.
Okay. Honestly, I've never even heard of this until I saw you guys' stories. And it seems so foreign. Like, what an odd concept. But honestly, what an amazing ministry. I mean, these little lives, they need homes, and not only that, like you're building your family. I wrestled a little bit with like, ooh, how do I feel about that? But at the end of the day, these are little souls that were created and they need a home. They need love. They need a family. They need all the things that any other child that doesn't have that and is facing adoption or foster care or anything like that, it's the same situation. So I don't know. I think that's so cool.
It is wild. Jonathan and I still sometimes look back and be like, did we really do that? Is that a thing that the Lord even allows people to do? Like freeze life. Fitz was frozen for 3 years before he was thawed and implanted into me. Like the fact that you can freeze life just seems so surreal. So it is. I mean, it's still something I'm like, I can't believe we did that. Like, is that real?
Yeah.
It's pretty wild. I've gotten that comment too. Like, well, why would you adopt embryos if there's all of these children that need to be adopted? And I'm like, well, they're just as much need homes as another child. Like they're frozen in time and like they're very much little people. Like the boys were frozen for 10 years and Eloise was frozen for 12 years and they're living, breathing beings. And it's so amazing that like somebody made this science so that these little embryos could get out of the freezer and into wombs and become living, breathing beings. And that's kind of NEDC's like big mission is saving these embryos. And they give families an option because really with embryo adoption, your choices, or with when you do IVF, your choices are after you're done with your embryos, you can continue to freeze them and you pay hundreds of dollars a year to store them, which we had to do for a few years to get Eloise. And then you can donate them to science or you can just discard them, which you've spent these thousands of dollars to create them. Those really aren't the best options. Or you can donate them. And so that's what NEDC did, is to create a place where families can donate them and then have control over who gets to adopt them. And like we had to go through a process where we wrote a letter to our family, the donor family, and they like accepted us. Like we had to wait on them to accept us as the family they wanted their embryos to go to. And so it's a really like beautiful way of doing it and crazy too.
Well, I feel like too, as Christians, if you believe that life starts at conception, like we do, like these are lives, like these are just as much lives as anyone else. And also, I just feel like there's not enough light shed on the amount of life created and destroyed in this industry. And it's definitely an area that I think Christians could definitely put more attention to, because there are tons of tiny little embryos waiting at the chance of life after IVF.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's honestly what made me, I don't even know how to really put it. Not that I was ever like, again, it's not my business what anybody does to build their family at the root of it. But just considering that as like, oh man, is that something that like I would consider? And thinking through, really, this is not that different than just an adoption of a toddler or a 16-year-old or whatever, any other child that just needs a home. Because I agree with you guys, life starts at the very beginning, and the alternative is heartbreaking. So like I said, in itself, even if the organizations aren't ministries, I don't know if the NEDC is, it is a ministry, like you're fostering life. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit, like, how does the process work for if there was anybody that was interested in this? Where do you begin? How does it kind of work?
There are options. There's different routes. Like, a lot of it can also depend on what state you're in, because unfortunately, and I guess in some ways, fortunately for us, we didn't have to go through the home study process and all of this, because in the state of Georgia, it's considered a trade of goods. It's not considered an adoption. They don't see it that way. So a lot of it can depend on what state that you are starting in or are interested in. There's also, you can go through the NEDC like that, or you can go through, I don't think it's as common to go through just your local fertility clinic, but you can also go private. We were on a couple different websites that you put your profile out there, and there are donors that have put their profile out there, and you can privately interact and reach out to inquire more in order to match privately. And that route, it depends on the family that's donating on what they require. And then there's varying levels of openness. So for Fitz, he will receive information at 18 where he can then decide if he wants to inquire further. But I will say the actual physical process of it was startling because, again, we did no research. And I just remember the day the package came, like you are matched, you've talked to your doctor and like, okay, we'll send you a package and with instructions. You're like, okay. And like, it never hit us because, again, we had not looked into this at all, but it is the last portion of fertility treatments. Like it's the last part of IVF, and that involves shots and medications. And I mean, it is a gruesome process. There were tears, so many tears. I just remember getting the package of all these vials and needles for drawing and giving intramuscular shots to yourself or your spouse. I remember Jonathan just being like, I am not qualified to give you an intramuscular shot. And I was like, well, it's a lot harder for me to give it to myself. So you're going to have to.
You are today.
I know. I was like, listen, you're on the giving end. I'm on the receiving end. So if I can do this, you can do this.
Yes.
But yes, it was just this wild, how did we get here? I cannot believe it definitely sheds a lot of light on the physical ramifications of now, again, there's options to do it a more natural transfer. We did a synthetic where they shut down your cycle and they give you a synthetic cycle. So you have to inject yourself with estrogen, progesterone. So that way they have an exact time of when to transfer the embryo in order to give the embryo the best chance at life. And so we thought that was the best route. And it was not easy by any means.
Was your experience similar?
Yes, but I did it 3 times.
Adrienne, you're amazing.
It was brutal. It got to the point with, I think when I did the boys transfer, that I was holding resentment towards Rick for giving me the shots. That
it's a real thing.
Had to stop. He had to stop. I was like, I have to do this myself because now I'm just mad at you because you're hurting me. And it's really not your fault. So I just started doing them myself. And I would stand in front of a mirror and then just shoot my booty with this 22 gauge needle. And it was so painful. And there was definitely times where I cried and ended up being allergic because with the progesterone, they mix it with an oil. And with Eloise, I ended up being allergic to whatever oil they mixed it with. I think it was ethyl oleate or whatever. And so I had like these crazy reactions where the tops of my feet itched until they bled. And then like I had these huge knots where I had done the shots and I couldn't sit down. And
the knots are a real thing.
So painful. It was so painful. So I ended up having to switch, and then most of the pain went away, but not all of it. And with her, like you're supposed to be able to wean off of the shots. By like 9-10 weeks, your placenta takes over. Well, that like fell on the 4th of July. And so like everybody closed and like nobody was open to read my results, because you have to go in and do blood draws to make sure your levels are staying where they're supposed to be. And so I ended up having to do those shots until like 15 or 16 weeks, because it was like, took forever for them to like read my results, and I was out of town, and I was so thrilled when they were over. But man, we fought hard to get that little girl here. And even with my transfer with her, you have to fill your bladder really full so that they can do the ultrasound, so they can put the ultrasound in so they can see where they're inserting the embryo. And I have a tilted uterus. And so like every time he tried to like do the trial one, it like wasn't working. And it was like, it took 45 minutes to do her transfer. I was crying by the end of it because it was just so painful, the whole thing. And when we were done, I was like, if this baby doesn't stick, I don't know what we're going to do. She fought hard to get here, and here she is. She's been a fighter ever since. But it's not an easy process, but it's definitely worth it. I think just being able to know how your adopted child has been through pregnancy, and like not having to worry about there being any sort of if a birth mom has taken drugs or something, like, you know, that your baby you have carried it. And it's just kind of wild and crazy to think. I love watching people's faces when I'm like, yes, they're adopted, but I carried them. And they're like, what?
That was definitely a thing after having Fitz, and like explaining like, oh, but he's an adopted embryo. And that was like offered no answers. They were just like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
I'm like having to go and like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And we're like, neither did we until we did it.
But it's like the most beautiful thing ever.
No, I think that is really cool. I did want to see, what would you say, obviously, beyond the precious babies and the life that comes from this whole process? I would imagine that there are probably other blessings from the experience that have probably come out. I mean, I'm sure it's really hard, like you're explaining, even just the physical process. It really does kind of shine a different light on, you know, a mother's labor of love. You know, you're really putting your body through it because this is what is so worth it. Like, these little lives are so worth it. And obviously I've never been through this, but even with my own kids, I know I would go through every single contraction, every single, you know, discomfort, pregnancy discomfort, you know, labor, whatever, a million times over to have them here. So, you know, we're just extending that now with, you know, the process in this. Oh, but yeah, where would you say that there are other blessings that kind of came out of this in your marriages, you know, with your other kids?
I would say having done the more traditional route of adoption, and while there are real joys there, embryo adoption is indeed a league of its own, just because, you know, getting to carry a baby, you produce hormones that like naturally are priming your body to attach. So there's like immediate attachment. And so and yet at the same time, like, their story is still beyond just our family. So it's such a category of its own, you know, in some ways, you know, not that I would want to erase our other kids' lives prior to mine, but man, it was such a blessing and a joy to be able to carry Fitz and to be able to care for him, you know, from day 5 of growth for him, even though it was 3 years later. But like getting to just to be a part of it the whole way, like, you know, as a mom, I wish I could do that for all my kids, even though I know that's not their story. And again, I wouldn't want to erase that, but it was a joy getting to know that I got to carry Fitz for sure.
Yeah.
I think for us, it's kind of crazy because like the 3 of them are adopted, but they look like my other children, which is just like wild. But I mean, they don't really understand or know their stories quite yet, but we do talk frequently about them being adopted embryos and that they have siblings out there that they will one day hopefully know. But I feel like the beauty in it is like my older kids get to learn and know about adoption, and they love to tell people that they have adopted siblings, and the shock and awe of like people being like, wait, what? Because I do have 2 sets of twins. And so my girls just love to be like, and there's another set of twins at home. And so they've just enriched our lives so much that like, I'm just so grateful that we chose life for them. And I can't imagine what our lives would have been like if we had just continued to pursue having our own biological children, which I love all 4 of them. But there's just something special about those 3 siblings that have just brought so much joy to our lives that I'm just so grateful that we have it. I'm so grateful that the Lord put it on Christina's heart so then it could be told to me, because there's just not a lot of information about it out there. To where I mean, I feel like now it's getting a little bit more traction, like adoption agencies are now offering an embryo adoption category. I've seen that a few times, whereas 4 years ago, 5 years ago, that was not a thing. So it's exciting to see it get a little bit more out there. And if anybody ever asks, I'm always like, yes, I will talk about it. I love sharing about our story and about our precious little kiddos. I feel like it's not as obvious that they're adopted to other people because they look like my other kids. I remember one time I saw somebody at church and I had like started talking about it and they're like, wait, what? They look just like your other kids. I'm like, I know, but they are adopted.
But they wouldn't be a part of your family if it hadn't been for this process. Like your families would not be what they are, who they are. And yeah, you can definitely see the Lord's hand in all of it. By Christina, you guys being perfectly matched with exactly what you felt like was laid on your heart for your other child that, you know, you guys had adopted and brought in. Like, yeah, you can definitely see the Lord orchestrating all of it. And seriously, you guys have gorgeous families. I'm sure you guys are tired, but you're doing wonderful. You guys are doing awesome. Thank you, ladies, so much for chatting. And I don't know, I agree. This isn't something that I think a lot of people know is an option for moms and dads anywhere that are looking to expand their families, whether out of an adoption has to be an option because it's a necessity or it's just an extension of, you know, your current family with your biological children. I think it's really cool because you think about, I wonder what that statistic is. How many embryos and lives have been saved through this? I don't know if either one of you had ever looked it up.
Well, I know with the NEDC, they do like a running count and they have like, I think it's like 1,600 babies that have been born. But that's just them. I mean, there's Snowflake Adoption, I think, which is what it's called. I've seen them post too. I think they're at like 1,000 or more. But then there's also the fertility clinics that do it too for couples. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's probably a crazy number. We don't really know. But I mean, I know that the numbers of them frozen is like over 1 million, which is just wild. Crazy.
I think the fact that surprised me the most is how long this has actually been going on, though. Like, I think the oldest one is like in her 50s, and she's also had kids. And I mean, it's been going on for a long time.
Is embryo adoption pretty new?
I'm not so sure about embryo adoption, but the IVF portion where you freeze an embryo and then thaw it for a later transfer has been around for quite a while. So the first frozen embryo thawed and then successfully has been going on for decades.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure when, I guess we should know that, when the first embryo adoption. I think our clinic, they've been doing it. I think some of the oldest embryos that have been born are in their teens, maybe even 20s. So yeah, which is crazy.
I think another blessing, if I could name one, is just the value of life. Like the value of life at every stage that we've welcomed kids in, and just in whatever condition, like it's just the value of life from the very beginning and all the way through. I think that's kind of been a blessing to be able to show all of our kids from all the different backgrounds that just life matters, each individual one.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that alone, what you just said, that life matters, is not always an agreed upon idea or truth. Mm-hmm. And I think embryo adoption in itself really can and should highlight how that is true, because mm-hmm. half of your families would not be here, or parts of your families would not be here. And how different would your family look if they weren't? So I think that really highlights, how important life is, like you said, at every single stage. It all has value. We all have value. They all have value. And not at all to discount. I mean, I think fathers feel this as well. I think it's on a different level with moms, that we get to see that and experience it, on a different level, and really know, like when you've been waiting for that positive for how long, that positive strip, and you hear it, like you're instantly like, I'm a mom. It's not happening in 9 months. I'm a mom today, and your husband is mm-hmm. is a dad at that moment too, so, but you feel it, it. And y'all's story is just beautiful. And I'm really grateful. I know you guys probably have some kiddos to finish tucking in. Thank you so much for chatting. And I feel really honored to be able to hear. This is seriously, I've had so many questions, and I got to get answers. So thank you.
Well, anytime you have questions, I'm sure either one of us will always be open to answering them.
Yes, it's a joy.
Well, thank you again. And I hope you guys have a great evening. Bye, guys.
Thank you. You too. Bye.